I was awake before the sun, feeling the weight of silence settle around me. It had been a year since I agreed to a prenup, a year since I thought I knew who I was marrying. Everything was supposed to be fine, until it wasn't. I had always trusted him, loved him, my fiancé, a man I believed would stand by me through everything. He was smart, successful, with a future that seemed so bright. We lived in his condo, a space we shared, though I was never allowed to truly make it mine. His rules, his life, and I was just the guest, despite everything I gave. But one decision, a single choice that I didn't question, was now unraveling everything. He had won the lottery, millions. It should have been a blessing. But in an instant, it became the tool he would use to expose just how much he had really wanted to keep things separate. The prenup, which I had insisted on, was now a barrier between us, and I was the one standing on the other side of it. "You signed it," he said, voice steady but distant, as I stared at him. My heart raced, but I couldn't speak. "You want to share the winnings now?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. The silence between us was deafening. "Remember the prenup?" he said, his eyes cold. "This money, it's mine, not yours." And in that moment, I realized how far apart we had drifted. The man I had married wasn't the one I thought he was. He wasn't the man I had trusted, loved, or built a life with. He was someone else entirely, someone who saw me as nothing more than a pawn in his game. The truth was laid out in black and white. The prenup he had insisted on, the one I had so foolishly agreed to, had turned into my worst nightmare. And now, with millions on the line, there was no going back. We met in a small cafe on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of day where you just want to stay inside with a warm drink. I'd just moved into the city, starting fresh after leaving a dead-end relationship behind. He was there for a quick coffee break between meetings. His eyes caught mine when I fumbled with my purse, trying to pull out change to pay. He smiled, just a small, genuine smile, and I knew right then that there was something different about him, something that made me want to know more. Our first conversation was easy, like we'd known each other for years. He talked about his job as a corporate lawyer, how he loved the fast-paced lifestyle, the thrill of closing a deal. I was more hesitant at first, cautious about diving into anything serious after what I had just left behind, but there was something magnetic about him. The way he spoke with such confidence, yet still managed to listen when I spoke. It felt like he really cared. We exchanged numbers, and that was the start. Our relationship bloomed quickly. He was always attentive, always made time for me despite his hectic schedule. I admired how put together he was, how organized his life seemed. I was still figuring things out, trying to carve a space for myself in the world, but he had everything under control. And in a way, I found comfort in that. Over the next few months, we saw each other almost every day. He took me to fancy dinners, weekends away at luxurious resorts, and his condo quickly became our shared space. It was beautiful, sleek, and modern, everything I had ever dreamed of. He would laugh at my messy habits, at how I always left my shoes by the door or forgot to put the cap on the toothpaste, but I never felt judged. He'd tell me it was okay, that he liked the little imperfections, and I, naively, thought that was enough. Then came the talk, the one that changed everything. 6 months before we were supposed to get married, he sat me down and, in his usual calm demeanor, asked me about a prenuptial agreement. At first, I thought he was joking, but his serious expression told me otherwise. "We need a prenup," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "I want to protect my future, and you should too. It's just smart planning." I was taken aback. It wasn't that I was against the idea of protecting ourselves, but the tone of his words, the way he said, "my future," sent a chill through me. I hesitated. "Why do you need protection? I don't have anything. My savings are practically non-existent. My debt is more than my assets," I said, trying to make light of the situation. But he didn't laugh. He just looked at me seriously. "I don't have anything to lose, but you do." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "This is for both our futures." He didn't explain any further, and at the time, I didn't press him. The idea of protecting his assets didn't seem that unusual, especially with the way his life was so structured. We went ahead and had a lawyer drafted up. The agreement was lengthy, more pages than I ever imagined, and I signed it without really understanding everything. He told me it would protect both of us, but as the months passed, I began to notice things slipping. I couldn't decorate the condo the way I wanted. He refused to let me rearrange the furniture, insisting that it was part of the deal, that everything had to stay the way it was. It felt odd, but I convinced myself it was just his way. After all, I wasn't bringing anything of value into the marriage. He had a lot to protect, and I was just the one there to share it. But as time went on, I started feeling more like a guest in his life than a partner. And yet, I stayed. I loved him. Or so I told myself. I tried to ignore the little things, the moments when he would brush off my opinions, the way he seemed more concerned with keeping things separate than with building something together. And then came the money, the lottery. Everything changed after that. It wasn't supposed to be anything significant. A simple impulse, really. I had stopped at the gas station after work one evening, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and excitement. It was a rough week, and I just wanted a little distraction, something small to break up the monotony. So I bought a lottery ticket, a scratch-off, nothing special. I'd do it once in a while, maybe once a year, if I was feeling lucky. It was nothing serious. 3 days later, I was sitting at the kitchen table, grading papers, when I remembered to check the numbers. It was just a passing thought. I didn't expect anything, of course, but when I saw the match, when I saw that I had won 5 numbers and the mega ball, a smaller prize, but still a jackpot, I froze. I rubbed my eyes, double-checked, then triple-checked. 5.2 million. I couldn't believe it. I must have sat there for 20 minutes, staring at the ticket, rereading the numbers, before I called the lottery office. It was real. Life-changing money. I couldn't wait to tell him. I rushed home that night, heart racing. It wasn't just the money. It was the excitement of the future we could have, of all the possibilities. But when I walked into the apartment, something felt different. I didn't know if it was just nerves, but the silence between us felt heavier. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have something to tell you." His eyes flickered up from his phone. "What's up?" "I won the lottery," I said, barely able to contain my excitement. $5.2 million. He blinked. "Wait, really?" I nodded, smiling, trying to meet his gaze. "Yeah, really. I'm going to claim it tomorrow, and we'll have a new future. Everything's going to be different." There was a beat of silence. He set his phone down and looked at me, but his expression was unreadable. His lips tightened, then he shook his head slightly. "You know what that means, right?" he said, his voice almost flat. I frowned, not understanding. "What?" "The prenup," he said. "That means it's mine, not yours." My heart dropped. "What do you mean?" He stared at me for a moment, then gestured to the kitchen table where we had signed the prenuptial agreement months before. "Remember the clause about lottery winnings? Anything like that stays separate. It's in the prenup." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I had never thought this could happen. I had been so focused on the marriage, on the future we were supposed to build together, that I hadn't even considered the possibility that he would apply the prenup to something like this. It was his money now, and I had nothing to say about it. I stood there, frozen for a moment, trying to process what he was saying. The dream I had of a life we'd build together suddenly seemed distant, impossible. He had never really shared anything with me, had he? He had always kept things separate. He had kept his condo, his savings, his assets. He had kept his life, and I was just a part of it, a part that didn't matter when it came to the things that counted. The silence between us was thick with the weight of his words. I looked at him, waiting for something more, some sign of regret, some glimmer of the man I had once thought I knew. But he didn't offer anything. His face was impassive, like he had already accepted the reality of the situation. "Remember," he said softly, "it's my money, not ours." The words echoed in my mind, ringing louder than they should have. I wasn't sure if I was more hurt by the money, by the clause, or by the realization that this was who he really was. Someone who could take a win and turn it into a division, a separation. I went quiet, standing in the middle of the room, feeling like a stranger in the life I thought I had built. The next day, I was numb. The reality of the prenup settled into my bones, heavy and suffocating. I had thought the money would bring excitement, would bring us closer. Instead, it felt like a wedge had been driven between us, and with every passing minute, I could feel the distance grow wider. He went to work as usual, as though nothing had changed. I spent the day at home, sitting in silence, staring at the contract that had so neatly divided our lives. Every clause, every rule he had set in place was playing out exactly as it was meant to. I had nothing. He had everything. The money, the condo, the savings, everything we had was his. And now, so was the lottery. That evening, I called my lawyer. I didn't know what I was hoping for, but I needed someone on my side, someone who could tell me if I had any rights to the money at all. After the call, I felt no better. The lawyer confirmed what I already feared. The prenup was ironclad. The money was his, and no amount of pleading could change that. When he came home that night, I was already sitting at the kitchen table, my hands trembling. He didn't greet me with the warmth I had once hoped for. Instead, he sat down across from me, his face unreadable. There was no excitement in his eyes, no celebration of the windfall that had come our way. Just emptiness. "I'm going to claim it tomorrow," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's ours now, you know? We could do so much with it. Travel, start fresh, everything. It's the future we always talked about." He didn't react immediately. He just stared at me, his fingers drumming lightly on the edge of the table. The silence stretched on, unbearable and thick with tension. Finally, he spoke, his tone cold. "I never agreed to share it with you. Remember that clause. It's mine, all of it." The words hit harder than I expected. I had known he would bring it up, but hearing him say it so plainly, so matter-of-factly, felt like a punch to the gut. "But we're married," I replied, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "We're supposed to share everything." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of annoyance. "We've always kept things separate, haven't we?" he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I've made it clear that I wanted my assets protected. That's why we signed the prenup." I couldn't believe it. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted with my life, was now sitting across from me, justifying why I didn't deserve a single cent of the money I had won. I had thought we were building a life together, but now I saw the truth. We had never been equals. To him, I was just an afterthought, a side note to his carefully crafted plans. "This isn't fair," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. "Fair?" he scoffed. "Fair is getting exactly what you signed up for. You knew the terms. I don't owe you anything." It was then that I realized what I had been so afraid to admit, that I had been blind. This marriage wasn't about partnership. It wasn't about sharing or building something together. It was about control. He had always controlled everything, the money, the decisions, the life we lived, and I had just gone along with it, believing that love was enough. But love wasn't enough, not anymore. I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. "I need some space," I said, my voice breaking. He didn't say anything as I grabbed my things. I walked out the door, the cold night air biting at my skin. But it didn't matter. I was numb. As I walked away from the apartment, away from the life I had built with him, I realized something that had been hiding in the back of my mind all along. I wasn't the one who had been wrong. He was. And it was time to start taking control of my own life. The days after that night were a blur. I didn't know where to turn or what to do. He had made it clear that I wasn't welcome in his life anymore, not in any meaningful way. The money, the condo, everything we had built together, it was all his. The prenup was his shield, and I was nothing more than a spectator in my own life. I moved into a small apartment across town, a place far enough from him to give me space, but close enough that I could still feel the weight of the life I had left behind. The apartment was bare, nothing like his luxurious condo. It was small, but it was mine. It felt like the first step toward freedom, though I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next. The first night I spent there was the hardest. I lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. I had always imagined that one day we'd build something real together. I had thought the money would change our lives, but it only highlighted the cracks that had always been there. I tried to keep busy. I went to work, threw myself into my routine, but everything felt off. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the coldness in his voice, the finality of his words. I replayed our conversations over and over, wondering where I had gone wrong. Had I been too trusting? Too naive? My phone buzzed, dragging me out of my thoughts. It was a message from my best friend. She had heard about the lottery win and wanted to check in. She'd always been a steady presence in my life, someone who didn't sugarcoat things, but still cared deeply. "Hey, I know things are rough right now, but I just want you to know I'm here for you. If you need to talk or anything, just let me know," she texted. I stared at the message, torn. I wanted to talk to her, to tell her everything I was feeling, but part of me still didn't want to admit how much I had lost. Instead, I replied, "Thanks, I'm just trying to figure things out." The truth was, I didn't know how to move forward. The man I had married had shown me exactly who he was, and it was a version of him I didn't recognize. He had built his life on control, on keeping everything separate, and I had been just a piece of his puzzle, nothing more. But something inside me started to shift. Maybe it was the loneliness, the anger, or the realization that I wasn't the one who had been wrong. He had manipulated me into believing I wasn't worthy of his respect, of sharing anything with me, but I wasn't going to let him take everything from me, not without a fight. I reached for my phone again, dialing a number I hadn't expected to call, my lawyer. It felt like a strange step, but I knew it was necessary. The conversation with him was short, but important. He confirmed that the prenup, while tight, wasn't the end of the road. There were ways to challenge it, ways to claim what was rightfully mine. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, thinking about everything I had left behind. I couldn't change the past, but I could change how I move forward. I could fight for myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. It didn't take long for the situation to escalate. The moment my lawyer sent the first letter, demanding the fairness of our marital assets be reconsidered, everything shifted. Suddenly, it wasn't just my ex-husband I was facing. It was his family, too. I had barely settled into my new apartment when his mother showed up. She was always a little overbearing, but this time it felt different. There was no, "How are you doing?" or any attempt at civility. She barged in, eyes wide with determination, as though she were on a mission. "Where's the money?" she demanded, her voice sharp as she looked at me, expecting me to just hand it over. I froze, confused for a moment, before I realized what she was referring to. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice tight. She didn't back down. "The lottery money. You need to share it. It's not fair that you get to keep it all to yourself. You're being selfish. Your husband worked hard, and now you're taking everything." Her words hit me like a slap. I had never liked her much, but this was different. It wasn't just the usual passive-aggressive comments about my financial situation. This was outright hostility, as if she had every right to dictate what I did with my life, my money. "He didn't work hard for this," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "It's my money. The prenup states it's mine, and I'm entitled to it." Her face twisted with fury. "That prenup is a joke. You're breaking up a family for a few $1,000,000. Don't think we won't make this right. You're going to regret this." And with that, she left, leaving me standing in my tiny apartment, feeling smaller than ever. The weight of her words lingered long after she was gone. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the power she thought she had over me, the control she assumed she could still exert, even though I had walked away. A few days later, my ex-husband called. The call was short, but the bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. "I don't understand why you're making this so difficult," he said. "We could have worked this out. I told you it's mine. Why are you fighting me on this?" I didn't know what to say. All I could feel was the betrayal sinking deeper, twisting the knife he had already driven into my heart. I had trusted him, and now everything had been turned upside down. The next blow came when I got a letter from his lawyer. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was an accusation. They were accusing me of hiding assets, of being dishonest in the prenup. They were dragging my character through the mud, and I hadn't even seen it coming. I called my lawyer immediately, my hands trembling. He reassured me that this was a tactic, an attempt to scare me into backing down, but the damage had already been done. The accusations were public, and the shame felt unbearable. How had everything gotten so out of control? That's when the real manipulation started. His family began calling me, leaving messages, demanding I return the money, threatening me with legal action. They even started calling my friends, telling them that I was destroying a family for the sake of a few million. It felt like they were trying to turn everyone against me, to make me feel isolated and alone in this battle. But I wasn't backing down. I'd made the decision to fight for myself, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all his manipulative family, make me feel like I was the villain. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my independence, and my sense of self. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. The days blurred together. Between the constant legal battles, the endless harassment from his family, and the constant feeling of being watched, it felt like I was drowning. Every corner I turned, there was another threat, another call, another demand for the money, and with each passing day, I began to feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. I hadn't heard from my ex-husband in a while, but his presence was still everywhere. The emails, the letters, his family's constant attempts to manipulate me, it all felt like a never-ending storm. But it wasn't just the pressure that was breaking me, it was the isolation. I had no one left. My friends, the ones who had once supported me, had started pulling away. Some of them were afraid of the drama. Others had been convinced by his family that I was the one at fault. It didn't matter how much I tried to explain myself. The more they painted me as the villain, the more I began to question my own sanity. Was I really doing the right thing? Was I really fighting for the right reasons? But it wasn't just the external pressure that was taking its toll. It was the internal struggle, the self-doubt, the fear, the loneliness that crept in at night. I spent hours lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where I had gone wrong. Then, one night, everything came crashing down. I was sitting on the couch in my apartment trying to catch up on work. The quiet was deafening, the only sound the hum of the fridge in the corner. My phone buzzed, another message from my ex-husband's lawyer. Another legal threat, another accusation that I had done something wrong. I snapped. I had been holding it together for so long, trying to stay strong, trying to fight for what was right. But at that moment, all of the anger, the frustration, and the hurt came rushing to the surface. I grabbed my phone and typed out a message to him, something I had never dared to say before. You don't get to control me anymore. You don't get to take everything from me, not my dignity, not my future. I hit send without thinking, without considering the consequences. The moment I pressed the button, I knew it was too late. I had crossed a line. The floodgates had opened, and I couldn't take it back. For the first time, I had stood up for myself, not just legally, but emotionally. And the moment I did, it felt like everything changed. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the beginning of the end. My phone rang almost immediately. It was him. His name flashed across the screen, and for a second, I thought about ignoring it. But I couldn't. Why are you doing this? His voice was cold, distant. But there was something else there, something dark. You're making a mistake. You think this is going to end well for you, but it won't. You're destroying everything. You're destroying me. I felt my stomach twist in knots. I wasn't the one destroying anything. He had already destroyed us. But the words stung more than I expected. They cut deeper than anything I had heard from him before. You can't do this to me, he continued, his voice rising. You'll regret it. You'll regret pushing me to this point. And then it hit me. This wasn't just about the money, or the prenup, or the lottery winnings. This was about control. It always had been. I wasn't just his wife. I had been his possession, his means of stability, his safe space. And now that I was fighting back, now that I was standing up for myself, he couldn't handle it. I was no longer the compliant, quiet partner he had expected me to be. He had never seen me as an equal, as a partner. I had been his pawn in his game, and now that I was finally breaking free, he was going to do everything he could to pull me back in. You don't get to threaten me anymore, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but steady. I'm done. I hung up the phone and set it down, my hands shaking. I had never felt more alone in my life, but I had made a choice. I had made the decision to take control of my own life, even if it meant walking away from everything I had once thought I wanted. And for the first time in months, I felt a tiny spark of something, hope. The days following that phone call felt like a blur. I thought I had hit rock bottom after everything I'd been through. But now I realized that the real test was just beginning. I had finally stood up for myself. I had refused to let him or his family continue manipulating me. But what came next was the true turning point, the moment that changed everything. It started with a knock on my door. I had just gotten home from work, my mind still spinning from the constant back and forth with my lawyer. The last thing I expected was to open the door and find him standing there, my ex-husband, looking as cold and calculated as ever. He didn't even flinch when I opened the door, as if he had every right to be there. What do you want? I asked, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice eerily calm. We can't keep doing this. It's tearing us apart. We can figure this out. Just give me a chance. I felt a surge of disgust at his words. We can't keep doing this? He was the one who had made all the choices, who had pushed me away, who had kept everything separate. And now he wanted to act like he cared? No, I said firmly, stepping back from the door. You don't get to come here and act like everything's okay. You don't get to manipulate me anymore. This is over. He hesitated for a moment, looking at me as if waiting for me to change my mind. But I wasn't going to back down. I had come too far. There was no going back to the woman who let him control her life. Before I could slam the door, he stepped forward, blocking it. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. I came here to explain, to make it right. The anger bubbled inside me, and I felt my hands clench into fists. Make it right? You made the choice to sign that prenup. You made the choice to keep everything separate, to treat me like I was disposable. Don't come here acting like you've done nothing wrong. He didn't respond. Instead, he just stood there, looking at me, waiting. I could feel the pressure building between us, the same tension that had always existed, but now it felt heavier. And then, just as I thought he was about to say something else, I heard the sound of another car pulling up outside. It was his mother, of course. She wasn't going to let this go without a fight. I could see her through the window, standing by the car, hands on her hips, ready to charge in and make everything worse. I had had enough. I wasn't going to let this family walk all over me anymore. I wasn't going to let them tear me down, make me feel small. I opened the door wide, facing him and his mother, who was now walking up the driveway. "This ends today," I said, my voice firm. "You don't get to keep trying to control me. You don't get to manipulate me anymore. I'm done with your games." His face tightened, and for a split second, I saw something break in him. Maybe it was frustration. Maybe it was regret. But in that moment, I realized he wasn't the man I had married. He was someone else, someone I didn't recognize anymore. His mother stood just behind him, eyes wide with anger. "You have no right to treat my son like this. You're ruining everything." I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. "I'm not ruining anything. I'm just standing up for myself. Something you should have taught him to do a long time ago." The words hit her harder than I expected. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The silence between us was deafening. It felt like everything shifted in that moment. They couldn't control me anymore. I stood my ground, knowing that I was finally taking control of my own life. I wasn't going to be intimidated anymore. I wasn't going to let them dictate my happiness, my future. "You need to leave," I said, the words cold but resolute. "Both of you. I've had enough." I slammed the door before they could respond, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt a mixture of emotions, relief, anger, and a sense of power I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, I knew I was doing the right thing. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the prenup. It was about me. It was about finding my voice, reclaiming my power, and refusing to let anyone take it from me again. The aftermath of that confrontation was more intense than I ever anticipated. I thought that standing up for myself would bring relief, but instead, it opened the floodgates to a new level of chaos. His family didn't take kindly to my refusal to back down. They had expected me to cave, to give in to the pressure and return to my role as the compliant wife who knew her place. But I wasn't that woman anymore. The calls kept coming. His mother, his brother, even distant relatives, all demanding that I do the right thing and return the money. They painted me as the villain in this twisted narrative they had created, a woman who was destroying a family for the sake of a few $1,000,000. It didn't matter how many times I explained that I wasn't the one who had broken the marriage, that I wasn't the one who had kept everything separate. They didn't care. They were on a mission, and that mission was to make me feel guilty, to make me feel small. But the worst came when I received the court summons. I hadn't been expecting it, not this soon. It came in the form of a thick envelope, sealed with the insignia of my ex-husband's lawyer. My hands trembled as I opened it, the paper inside stark and formal. He was suing me for the money, claiming that I had taken what wasn't mine, accusing me of financial manipulation. I felt the ground shift beneath me. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. I couldn't believe this was happening. The man I had loved, the man who had once promised to build a life with me, was now trying to tear me apart for money. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, court dates, and sleepless nights. My lawyer reassured me that the prenup would stand, that there was no legal basis for his claim. But no matter how confident my lawyer was, the toll this took on me was undeniable. Every day, I had to face the reality of the person my ex-husband had become. The man who once claimed to love me was now using the legal system to strip me of everything I had fought for. But there was a turning point. During one of the hearings, as we sat in the courtroom waiting for the judge, something inside me clicked. I looked around at the people in the room, his lawyer, his family, the judge, and I realized that I was no longer the same person I had been when I walked into this mess. I was no longer afraid. I was no longer willing to let anyone control my narrative. I spoke up for the first time during the hearing, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "This isn't about money," I said, looking directly at my ex-husband. "This is about control. This is about your need to keep everything separate, to protect what's yours and keep me at arm's length. But I'm done. I'm done playing your game." The courtroom fell silent. My ex-husband's face darkened, but I could see something in his eyes. Regret, anger, maybe even fear. The dynamic had shifted. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was no longer the woman he could manipulate into doing what he wanted. By the time the hearing ended, the judge had ruled in my favor. The prenup stood and the money remained mine. I wasn't forced to share anything with him, not a single penny. But the victory didn't feel as sweet as I expected. In fact, it felt hollow. The money didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had fought back. I had reclaimed my power. But the fallout wasn't over. 2 days after the hearing, I came home to find that my car had been keyed. The word thief had been scratched into the side of it. It wasn't just a random act of vandalism. It was a message from his family. I called the police, filed a report, and started the process of getting the damage repaired. But I knew this was far from over. This wasn't just about money. This was about proving that I was no longer willing to be a victim. They could try to tear me down all they wanted, but I wasn't going to let them succeed. But the real shock came when I received a text from my ex-husband. The apology had come too late. The words were dripping with guilt, with desperation. "Please, I'm sorry, we can work this out. I don't want to lose you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He had lost me the moment he thought he could control me, the moment he thought he could strip me of my independence for the sake of his own security. And then, as if to confirm that I had made the right choice, I received a call from my lawyer. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Your ex-husband's brother got caught on security footage keying your car. We have everything we need to press charges." I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel vindicated. All I felt was a strange sense of peace. I had finally broken free. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I felt like I could finally breathe again. The court battles, the constant harassment from his family, the overwhelming weight of everything, it was all finally behind me. The charges against my ex-husband's brother had been settled. He had been ordered to pay for the damages, along with community service. It didn't feel like justice, but it was something. I no longer had to deal with the daily barrage of calls and messages. But more than that, I had started to rebuild. I moved on in a way I hadn't thought possible. I found a place for myself, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. My new apartment, though modest, had become my sanctuary. I decorated it however I wanted, without needing anyone's approval. There was a sense of peace in that simple freedom. I focused on my career, throwing myself into my work, and found a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't about the money anymore. The money was just a symbol of how far I had come, a reminder that I was no longer the person who had once allowed herself to be controlled by someone else. And then there was the call. It came late one evening, right when I was beginning to feel like I was truly moving forward. It was from my ex-husband's father, the same man who had remained silent during the whole ordeal, who had only watched as his son tried to tear me apart. "Listen," he said, his voice quiet, almost apologetic. "I owe you an apology. I didn't realize how much damage my son had caused. I've seen what he's done, and I can't support that. He's been reckless, and I want you to know that you did the right thing." The words didn't have the weight I expected. It was too little, too late, but I appreciated the gesture. He went on to say that he had realized his own marriage had been unhealthy for years, that he had allowed his wife to manipulate him just as his son had done with me. He was filing for divorce too, he said. And strangely, I felt a small sense of relief. Maybe this was the beginning of him seeing things differently, of him finding his own freedom too. The truth, however, was that it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't waiting for anyone to apologize for what had happened. I wasn't holding on to the past. The lessons I had learned through this painful journey were far more valuable than any apology or justification could ever be. I walked away with my head held high, my heart stronger than it had ever been. The man I had married had shown me who he truly was, and in the end, that was the greatest gift I could have received. I wasn't the victim in this story. I was the survivor. And the best revenge wasn't living well. It was living on my own terms, free from manipulation and control. I had learned that I could take back my life, that I didn't need anyone's approval or validation to be whole. I was enough, just as I was. The money? It had been a blessing, yes, but it was nothing compared to the freedom I now had, the freedom to make my own choices, to live without fear, to build a future based on my own values and desires, not on someone else's. The hardest lesson I had to learn was that love, real love, wasn't about control or manipulation. It wasn't about keeping everything separate to protect your own interests. It was about partnership, mutual respect, and trust. And I had finally found the most important partnership of all, the one with myself. I don't regret the decisions I made. I don't regret fighting for what was rightfully mine. And I don't regret walking away from a man who never truly saw me as an equal. The future was mine, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it.